Welcome to the Lift Every Voice podcast, where we explore books by contemplative writers of color. I'm Christine Valters Paintner.
And I'm Claudia Love Mair. We are joined each month by the author of our book club selection. Together, we explore how increasing our diversity of perspectives on contemplative practice can enrich our experience of the Christian mystical tradition.
We encourage you to join us by reading the book, listening to the conversations, and engaging with the reflection questions on our website at abbeyofthearts.com. Welcome, everyone, to our Lift Every Voice book club. We're delighted to be returning this month with our featured book by Liuan Huska, Hurting Yet Whole, Reconciling Body and Spirit in Chronic Pain and Illness. We're really excited to be diving into this, and I'm also joined by my wonderful partner in conversation, Claudia Love Mair. So Liuan is a freelance journalist and writer at the intersection of ecology, embodiment, and faith. She's the author of this book that we're going to be exploring, which weaves memoir, theology, and sociocultural critique. Her reporting and essays have appeared in many places, including Chicago's WBEZ, Borderless, Christianity Today, The Christian Century, and NPR's Here and Now. And she's a regular columnist for Sojourners magazine. And she lives in Chicago. And I love this part from her bio. When not writing, she might be found gardening, trying to identify edible plants, and dancing in the living room and breathing. Beautiful. I love it. Welcome, Liuan. We're delighted to have you.
So good to be here with you both.
Liuan, please share what your spiritual life was before and just after the pain began. On page 3, you write, "Before the pain, I was invincible." You go on to say, "I began to mistrust my body, which had once served me so well. I distanced myself. In my heart and mind, I stepped out of my body away from the pain, vulnerability, and limits it represented." Could you tell us about those contrasts between before pain and just after when it first began?
Yeah. So to provide some context, I became a Christian in the Bible Belt, so in Southeast Texas, and then went to undergrad at Wheaton College, which is an evangelical school in the Midwest. And so my spiritual life was formed by that kind of flavor of spirituality, of a very personal God who intervenes in very personal ways in your life circumstances, and who answers your prayers, and who is legible in some way. And so, and then physically too, I was able-bodied. I was young. I started having ankle pain when I was 22, so I was very young. Didn't have a lot of experience with that whole world of illness and pain, other than, getting a cold here and there. So this is really getting thrown into the deep end, both spiritually, as far as reaching out to God and crying out and not receiving any kind of response that I could read. It was just illegible to me what was going on spiritually. And I would say, looking back, that you could call it a dark night of the soul, or God's presence as absence. And other Christians did help me. Other people of faith provided me with those resources. But I think the contrast was from something that was predictable, like God is predictable and following certain rules. Like, we do this and God does this. And then I do this and my body does this, right? and then the opposite, which was just not predictable and kind of a wild and unknown space. And so it's frightening and very just disorienting.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
I I love this book so much because you know, Claudia Love and I both have chronic illness, and we both live very closely to that sense of vulnerability, and both have experienced a lot of the messages that people, particularly in faith communities, can offer, the answers that people want to offer. And I think what's so beautiful about learning to live well with chronic pain and illness is what you talk about. You say we must learn to be fully human, not superhuman, by living with our embodied limits, not transcending them, which I think is key. We must make peace with our tenuous existence, susceptible at any moment to devastating illness and even death. We must realize that our vulnerability is what opens us to rely on others, and through these relationships, becoming whole. It's really beautifully said. I wonder if you can tell us more about this gift and grace of vulnerability, and how our pain can be the portal to this kind of deepening relationship to our bodies and to others.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I started my college career, that was like 20 years ago now, but I just remember coming to my pain with this sense of shame. Like I remember being depressed my first year of college, which was for many reasons. One was moving to the Midwest from the South and experiencing winter, the depths of winter, but also just completely culture shock for me. Um, Partly being a woman of color in a majority white space, just a lot of pain, but not really named around that. And I remember just wanting to cover up my pain because it felt to me like a failure to be experiencing pain and not being strong enough for whatever the circumstance was, not being able to get over it. So that really kept me from reaching out to people during that first year when I was having mental illness. And but eventually I was able to just tell people I'm really not okay. And that's just so key, right? When someone asks you, how are you doing? And obviously you have to discern whether they're safe or not to be able to open up to. But that first act of saying, I'm really not okay, can open up the door to so much, to getting below the surface and getting to a deeper human connection. And I've experienced that in many ways, both, on an emotional connection level, but also just practically, like in some of the years when I was most in pain. And I was, in my mid-20s, so it just felt also like I had to get over a lot of like, I should be able to do this, but I can't. Like I was trying to move apartments. And I was already married at the time, so my husband was there to help. But I also reached out to some friends and said, I just can't clean this apartment. Like we're supposed to leave it broom clean, but my back hurts. So to take that step of like entrusting other people into this vulnerable space where I wasn't able to do the things that I felt like people my age or whatever should be able to do, that was really hard. But when I accepted that their help, that also just changed the nature of that relationship too. So it wasn't just like someone standing on the outside, but allowing someone to come in and see, like, I really can't do this. And then they were okay with that and they were willing to help. That has allowed me to more and more open those like hard to open parts of myself to other people and experience so much grace and welcome and just being able to be who I am in those spaces.
Yeah, that's really, really a moving way to describe that. And I was 21 when I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and it was just after I'd finished college and I moved off to do volunteer work across the country. And, here I was with a group of 5 other women who I didn't know. And yeah, so I really resonate with that, with the tenderness that comes at first, and how do you navigate the isolation that you feel, and how do you know who's safe to open up to, and then learning about how much vulnerability really does deepen and bond, or can, I should say, a relationship, depending on the maturity of all the people involved. But anyway, that's really beautiful. And because I really think that we live in this culture that's so much about being strong and overcoming and carrying on despite whatever, and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable is probably the biggest like grace that there is, and finding people we can be safe with. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and it's also hard when you have something that's chronic, so you're not just opening up one time in an acute situation, but it's just ongoing, so it becomes even harder sometimes to say, well, I'm still in this same situation that I was, or maybe similar a year ago or however long ago. I still need help. That's an added layer of challenge.
Yeah, that's very true. I find a lot of my very closest friends also have chronic illness because they understand the best about how this is not going to just go away.
Right. Yeah, there's no quick fixes.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you mentioned house cleaning, something that people take for granted when you're in a lot of pain. Sometimes just surviving the day, sometimes surviving the hour is challenging. And, we get these roles assigned to us as women, as Christian women. We are supposed to be great wives and cook and clean, all the time. That's our job. And there does come a great deal of shame when you can't do those things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. Thanks for naming that. There's so much around domesticity that is so hard to navigate as a woman. And I have 3 children now, and it's also it just feels like I should be the one to be there when my kids are sick, and I'm not allowed to be sick when everyone else is sick. So there are so many expectations to navigate.
Exactly. Well, my question is, you ask, what is healing when a person has chronic illness? Can a person still be whole, not just spiritually whole, but wholly whole, when her body is not functioning properly and she is suffering? Can you share your thoughts on those 2 questions?
Yeah, I think I before my chronic pain started, I approached healing as kind of wiping the slate clean or pushing the reset button and getting back to like the factory condition. and um, and then obviously that didn't happen, and there was nothing that would get me back to my previous normal. So I had to really rethink, if God is a God who heals, like what does that mean for me when I'm not experiencing the kind of healing I expected? And I got a lot of just food for thought and encouragement from this educator and Quaker named Parker Palmer, whom you all may have encountered. He's someone that's really, his writings have really helped me through the years. So his book, A Hidden Wholeness, is one that I really referenced in my own journey, but also in my book. And it's not dealing with chronic pain in particular, but it's dealing with like, what is wholeness? What does it mean for your insides to match your outsides, and for you to show up in whatever space or situation fully, not keep parts of yourself back, which I know it's not always possible to just be 100% like show all aspects of yourself in any social situation. But the idea of integrity and coherence and living from a place of like truth and honesty about who you are, that really spoke to me, especially when I was dealing with the worst of the pain and feeling, well, this is a big part of who I am now. I don't want to ignore this part of myself, but that's it feels like this is what my faith community is asking me to do, is transcend this part of myself in order to be whole. And that just doesn't sit well with me. So kind of rethinking what healing is as just being able to be fully present to our pain and to our own bodies, but also as our own bodies, as bodies that are hurting and suffering, as we're in the presence of other people. That really helped me to come to a healthier and just more workable definition of healing.
Yeah, I'm thinking about things like, because I was very much Pentecostal evangelical back in the day when Benny Hinn was doing his thing. And
Oh yeah.
I remember seeing people, expected to come out of wheelchairs, expected to throw their canes and their crutches away. And if you
Yeah.
can't, if you don't get that miracle, it's
Mhm.
not Benny Hinn's fault. It's not God's fault. It's your fault because you don't have it.
Right.
And that's really devastating to a person
Yeah.
trying their best to be connected to God.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Yeah.
the idea that, being fully present to yourself is healing. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the core things we have to navigate or negotiate is our own definition of healing when we're in a body that doesn't heal in terms of the physical side of things. And I've even been thinking lately about when I pray for myself and what I'm carrying in terms of pain, like am I even praying for like when I pray for healing, what does that mean? And it doesn't actually really mean the physical anymore. I mean, there's like obviously a longing for ease, but it's more coming to a place of like courage and acceptance and endurance and letting the grace rise out of that. And so kind of to deepen into that, because I think one of the key sort of aspects of sort of unpacking a Christian sort of exploration of healing, I think, is this idea that, Christ, first of all, came in a body, right? Which is like the core of what the incarnation is about. But even more amazing to me is that when Jesus is resurrected, that his body still carries the wounds, which to me is a staggering thought. I just find it absolutely stunning to think that when God's body is resurrected, that it still has the wounds. So, and you write so beautifully about how being fully human is to inhabit the wild mysteries of our body and trust that because Christ was a body and still is a body, we don't need to fear this place. We can say it is good because Christ meets us here. Such a beautiful image. And I love this truth about the woundedness still being holy and pointing the way towards something, wondrous about them in the resurrected life. So are there ways that support you in feeling the reality of the divine meeting you in your own wounded body? Like how do you experience that sense of whether you call it Christ or spirit or creator or, meeting you in that place of pain? Because I think that's so key to like shifting our theology around illness and faith.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess the first thing that comes to mind is that even though our bodies might be sources of pain, they can still be sources of pleasure and delight and enjoyment, although sometimes the pain can be so all-encompassing that it prevents us from really using all our other senses to experience those good things. But thinking about like the purpose of my body as not to like function perfectly, but to provide a source of connection to other people. And that my body's still doing that, even though there might be things that aren't working quite as I would like them to. That then just having like so much gratitude about like what my body is able to do, like enjoy delicious food and step on a crunchy leaf in the fall and take a warm bath, and really just soaking in those good things is a place where God really meets me in the midst of having a body that is wounded and suffering. But also, yeah, like you said, like there's something so staggering about God being resurrected with wounds. I think that what I carry in that is that wounds tell stories, and those stories are such a key part of our our own spiritual journeys and our own transformative journeys. And so that my body can continue to tell the stories of what I've been through, for me is like reading my body and saying there's so much grace and yeah, so much to be thankful for. And I think about that with childbirth. What do you call them? Like the marks, the stretch marks on the
Yeah, yeah.
belly, or I've had three kids, so I see these things, or I see like my breasts are kind of sagging because I've been breastfeeding 3 children for years and years and years and years, and being able to see these as stories and gifts instead of like imperfections that are not as they should be. That is the place where God meets me.
Yeah, I love that because we do live in such a culture of perfection, and of course, capitalism thrives on, perfection of the body and selling us all the things to make us, stay young and beautiful and thin, whatever that means. And how radical it is to embrace the wounds, embrace the stretch marks, the scars, all of those things as that's beautiful as the doorway to the stories that we have to tell of our own resilience and how we carry on. And I think too, yeah, I think the key too is being able to embrace the pleasure that we also feel. Baths are, I know Claudia Love and I both love a really good bath. So we're often messaging each other and we're like, I'm just getting out of the bath, or I'm just going to run a bath. And yeah, and when I'm in the bath, I usually feel really, really good. And I'm always conscious of that. Like this, I'm going to just be in this moment without pain or with minimal pain for a while and really savor that. Anyway, thank you for that. It's beautiful.
I
Yeah,
want
the
to
word resilience is really key. I like that word for what our bodies tell us.
I want to piggyback off of all of that. America especially is not very generous when it comes to women aging either. And Christine's in her 50s. I'm turning 60 this year. This body got a lot of stories.
Oh yeah.
Breastfed 5 kids. And it can be so hard to honor your body and honor those wounds and those stretch marks. And I also lost 100 pounds. So the loose skin, that should be a badge of honor for taking control of that aspect of my health. Some days it's really, really hard to be embodied in an imperfect body when you're constantly blasted with bodies that are young, that are photoshopped. But when you see them visually, you don't always think, "Ooh, that's probably photoshopped." You think,
Yeah.
that's a beautiful woman. And the temptation is to compare who you are to this person who doesn't have the stories on their body that you have. So thank you for that. But my question is, you raised 2 questions. Are we bodies, or do we have bodies? What's the difference between being a body and having a body?
Yeah. And so when I was like starting this chronic pain journey, I wanted to say I'm not a body. I have a body, but what's happening in my body isn't core to my sense of self. And that's a very in my brand of Christianity that I grew up in, a very common way to think about that is bodies are really secondary to our core personhood. And then I actually grew up in a non-religious home, and my parents were raised in China in the 50s and 60s and 70s. So they kind of had the opposite perspective. We are our bodies. So like everything, like if you don't have your health, you don't have anything. You just have to prioritize like all the material and physical aspects of your life, because if your health goes down and you die, that's it. There's no meaning to anything. So like the spectrum is kind of bodies are everything, and if your bodies are not functioning, or God forbid you die, right, that's it. Or bodies are not everything or almost nothing. And so I had to come to some kind of in between where, yes, I am a body, and my body is very essential to who I am. And what happens in my body, as we just talked about, these are stories that leave imprints on my soul, and there's a very back and forth relationship between body and soul. And but also I have a body, like whatever happens in my body's not the end story. It's not the full story. That I am more than a body. So having some way to like straddle those two things, I think is where I've landed as the healthiest approach. Yeah, I'd be curious to hear how you all have navigated that too in your own journeys.
I think ableism is a term that I just learned just a few years ago. And for me, body is very compelling because it's always doing things. Some of those things, I don't actually like. So I try to change perspective and say, well, don't approach what's going on right now to ableism or ageism. Just stay grounded right now in what's happening. And that's the work of soul for me, to stay present to what's going on, to be kind to myself and not be ableist or ageist when it comes to what's happening in my body. But I can't always do that. What about you, Christine?
Yeah, capitalism is so pernicious, right? And the message to do and to produce, and I think for many years I really wrestled with it, even though I wasn't completely conscious of it, even though like I highly valued Sabbath and rest, and I knew all of those things, and yet could see that kind of undercurrent of doing still at work, and how I often will value myself for what I do, what I produce. And so I think transforming that, because the body does things for sure, right? It's the vessel for producing, right? But it's also the vessel, as we've talked about, for pleasure, for delight, for joy, for relationship, for connection. And I think for me, trying to lean into that aspect of the body that holds the joy alongside the pain and the suffering and the woundedness. Yeah, to try and try and decolonize my mindset, and move away from trying to make my body do things that it honestly can't do sometimes, because I'm afraid of other people's judgments, or because I don't want to miss a deadline, or because I don't want to disappoint people. I mean, there's some, very good reasons why we push ourselves even when we're ill. But yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think it's one that I'm going to continue to be with probably for the rest of my life, is that whole dance and moving more deeply into one.
Yeah, you guys both kind of seem to talk about just stepping away from the narratives that we kind of impose over what's going on in our bodies, whether it's ableism or ageism or capitalism or all these isms that we impose. And it's so hard to get away from like judging as, oh, this is this and this is that, and these categories that we've all grown up with. being able to kind of come at it with just, this is what it is, and I will be here and experience it without needing to think it's going to go one way or the other. I think that, yeah, being present is kind of the task for all of us.
Yeah.
I know it's not my turn, but I do
Oh,
have
go right ahead.
one more thing I want to ask you both. How do you, or if you deal with a fear of how many good years do I have left? How long am I going to be able to write or to work or to produce anything? Do you have that fear sometimes, and how do you manage that?
Liuan, I'll let you go first.
Well, I'm 36, so I was just talking with my husband about this, how he's 41, so he's 5 years older than me, and he says he can feel just in like the off moments that his strength is like slowly slipping away, and that things are just becoming harder to do, and recharging his batteries is like the charge just doesn't get as full every time you charge up again. I have to say I haven't quite reached that point where I feel like, oh, I'm on the downhill turn. But I've definitely witnessed that with loved ones and family members. Yeah, and I think about that for myself, like it could come sooner than I expect. And so how will I prepare myself for that eventuality, that inevitable? And I guess thinking about death is so sobering. And even more, even just as sobering is not being able to do things while you're still alive, is like that in between space. And I guess I just try to think about it more and not avoid the topic.
Yeah, yeah, Claudia Love, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. It's I think I always thought, because my work, because I can write from bed, you know what I mean? I can always do a certain amount, but lately, because the last couple of years have been quite hard on my body in particular, I am starting to have that wondering, like how, like is the reduced pace that I currently work at, is that even still manageable? And what is called for going forward? And what would that mean for me? Like if I couldn't write or I couldn't teach, like how do I know that I'm beloved, and I know that yeah, that I have gifts simply by being who I am. And, when writing is your passion, it's hard to imagine having to shift that. Yeah, and both my parents died in their early 60s too, so I'm definitely having the mortality question, because I'm to be 54 this couple months, and definitely having that mortality thing of like, oh, like, I've often like, because in monastic tradition, contemplating your death is a big part of that practice. And so I've always been drawn to that. I think as someone um, who's had a lot of experience of loss, I do find it quite a potent place to be, to dwell in that space of what loss teaches us about the texture of life. And something about suddenly, I feel like it's even more, a little more, less comfortable than I would like, and a little more real, and coming up to that place in my life. So just really real, yeah, questions. Thank you for that, Claudia Love. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I want to actually dovetail off that, because what we're talking about, do we have any value when we're not doing anything? And I love the part we talk about, theologian Joyce and Mercer talking about older adults, and when they can't work anymore and they can't take care of themselves anymore, do they have a calling still? Which is such it's a beautiful question, because it honors the fact that they could still have a calling, right? Instead of just dismissing them. And of course, she believes that they do, and sort of like, it talks about, instead of what we do and how we're useful to a relational ecology, which I think is really beautiful. So I love this because I've often thought that our very primary vocation is taking care of our bodies. So before we do anything else, we need to consider what is nourishing for us and not, when possible, not enslave ourselves to that capitalist relentless system that demands that we work so many hours. So yeah. So anyway, I just wondered how all this reflection has shifted your own sense of your calling in life, and what does that mean to hold that tension between the doing, the usefulness, and then the idea of relational ecology? What does that mean for you and how you live your life?
Mhm. Yeah, I read your question when you sent it, and the first thing that came to mind is my dad's situation. So yeah, just for listeners, he was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer just a little over a month ago, so it's very sudden. And um, the thing that's been really tricky relationally is that he's not been like super involved in my life. So and he also lives like across the country. But his this where he's at right now is like kind of calling me in a way that is irregardless of like his use or benefit to me, like as far as like rationally speaking, like I like, it's easy like on a rational level to think, well, he wasn't that involved in my life. Why would I drop everything at this point to like just go and be with him in his time of suffering? But I think what it's calling out in me is just like this kind of human to human, like what does a human need in this time? Like when you are suffering or when you're in your final days and your end of life, like what is like kind of a thing that a human would want to offer another human in that time, regardless of what benefit they have, that other person has for you. And that's kind of what came to mind for me, is that when we see if whether we're in that vulnerable situation ourselves or when we're witnessing another person walking in that valley, like that kind of evokes this, like, this is what we do, this is what it means to be human, is to come alongside and be with and be in with that person. And for me, like that is like the highest calling of a human being.
Mm. It's so exquisite because it's so real and true and born out of the pain and the tensions that you're experiencing. And, it's not like, an easy sort of answer. It's one that you've clearly had to wrestle with. And I love that idea of, loving presence being our ultimate calling, that when it comes down to it, that's what we're called to. Thank you for that.
Right now, I'm studying to be a death doula, and
Yeah.
I think the whole work is to be able to come into people's lives in their most vulnerable moment. Like
Mhm.
I remember when I had my babies, I felt like the angels were in the room with me.
Yeah.
I gave birth,
Yeah.
and they rejoiced when the baby was here. But I also feel that walking beside someone who um, is soon to pass away, and it's a different way that the angels come, but they still come, and it's still a holy place to be. And so not only is that the best of being human, I think it's one of the best things about being holy, to be able to bring this deep spirituality into those last days for somebody, even if the deep spirituality is only something you are feeling, but the other person is experiencing, you are present, you are here. And so you're kind of a placeholder for God, whether they understand that or not. So thank you for that. My question, oh, did you want to comment on that? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say everybody should take death classes just the way they take birth classes. Like it should be
Exactly.
something we're all preparing ourselves for. And I just wish there were more resources. And I love that you're training to be a death doula. I think that's such an important work. And there's so many parallels between dying and giving birth that's just that thin place of just extreme vulnerability.
Yeah. So my question, speaking of vulnerability, is you read Vulnerable Bodies by Judith Snow, and she puts forward this idea of God as a paraplegic. Could you talk about that and how it impacted you?
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah, Judith Snow is a disability scholar, and she has so much experience just living with, and I think she has her own disabilities, but in community with people who have disabilities. So she's really helped me to reimagine God. Like, I grew up thinking about God as all the omnis, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, yeah, and just being kind of the unmovable mover, kind of being someone that isn't touched in a way that like shakes you to the core when it comes to suffering. So thinking about God as someone that is experiencing all the things that we experience, including our limits and our vulnerabilities. And so Judith Snow talks about God as paraplegic, as in God is like the head of the body of Christ, but relies on the members of the body, the hands and feet. And this is quite biblical. We are Christ's hands and feet and voice and everything in the world. To do God's work in the world, that God works through us, that's the medium through which God works. So if it weren't for us, then God would not be working, so that whole image of God as being reliant on us to do the work, and vulnerable in the sense that that God is taking on all of these things that we experience too, and taking them into the heart of God, and allowing that to move him or her, or them. That really just gave me a lot to work with, like just opened my mind to all these other ways to approach God that didn't have to do with God as the unmovable mover that doesn't feel what we feel.
Yes, thank you.
Well, Liuan, we're coming to the end of our time, so I just want to say thank you for this really beautiful and heartfelt and vulnerable conversation. I feel really blessed by both of you, and just the wisdom that you share in this wonderful book. I really highly recommend it. Hurting It Whole, Reconciling Body and Spirit in Chronic Pain and Illness. If you or someone you love are experiencing illness, or if you have a body, which I'm sure most of you do, you might want to read it and start rethinking your theology if you are, indoctrinated into this world of doing. There's so much wisdom that those of us with chronic pain and illness have to offer, and you do express it so beautifully in your book. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, both of you.